Hey! Welcome to She Recaps. Today, I'll be recapping a 2002 drama film called Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Feel free to like and subscribe to support me, and comment your thoughts below. The film begins with Frank, an elite scammer, using a knife to gently peel off the tiny numbers on the check. Then he edits the check by sticking a fake label on it. Later, Frank brought the forged check to the bank to be cashed, but the bank teller rejects him based on his looks. While leaving the bank, Frank happened to see a pilot surrounded by numerous stewardesses. Filled with envy and a new hope, Frank decided to pose as a pilot. So he went and disguised himself as a journalist to get into one of the prestigious airlines. He pretended to interview the CEO in order to gain tons of details regarding pilots. Afterwards, he took on the identity of a pilot with the help of a custom-made pilot's uniform. Having failed earlier, Frank decided to forge another printed check by soaking a plain model in water so the logo on the model could be easily removed. Frank sticks the logo on the printed check and slides the check within the book and squeezes. Frank brings the check with him to the bank, this time using his identity as a pilot along with his elite forgery skills. He manages to exchange it for a lot of money. Hence, Frank purchased numerous model planes and started forging checks in bulk, resulting in a lot of forged checks. In order to prevent the big banks from realizing the scheme and that the checks were fake, Frank used his charm and charisma to mesmerize the female bank teller. Also, she revealed to Frank that the banks will likely be adding codes to the bottom of each check very soon in order to identify whether a check is real. The codes are generated by a specific coding machine, so Frank buys a coding machine from a bank that had recently failed and gone out of business. With the machine, Frank's forged checks were no longer distinguishable from the real ones, so over the next few months, Frank was able to obtain millions of dollars through forged checks. However, the number of bad checks soon caught attention of the FBI, so Detective Smith followed a lead and found the hotel where Frank was staying in. As Smith races into Frank's room, a calm Frank appears from the bathroom. Smith was about to arrest Frank, but Frank lied to him that he was too a detective and his partner had just escorted the culprit out. Smith was confused by Frank and asked to see Frank's ID, so Frank took it out and passed it to Smith. But just as Smith was about to open it, Frank tells Smith to look out the window to see his partner escorting the culprit to the car. Smith saw someone led into a car, so he believed Frank was a detective too. Then, Frank tells Smith he was going to take the machine away as evidence and told him to stay behind. When Frank left, Smith sat and opened Frank's wallet, only to see many random coupons, realizing that he'd been scammed. He rushed to the window only to see Frank sprinting away with the coding machine, infuriating Smith. Then, he searched through files and found Frank's mother, but she and Frank's father had divorced years ago and she had no clue where Frank was. Seeing Frank's picture frame, Smith was astonished to know that this brilliant scam artist was only a teenager. Then Frank's mother asked Smith about the situation and, frustrated, Smith informed her that her son had forged a check of over $10 million. Afterwards, Smith continued to search for Frank's whereabouts while Frank arrives at a hospital, planning to take the identity of a doctor. Frank forged a certificate from a prestigious medical school and showed it to the director, who immediately hires him. As head doctor, Frank began watching many medical videos and learned to imitate what they did, and gave the other doctors random orders. Later, while Frank was flirting with a female nurse, the hospital receives a patient in emergency. Due to the severity of the patient's injuries, Frank had to make a quick decision, but when he saw the blood mess, he rushed to the janitor's room and vomited. Knowing he can't handle it, Frank decided to switch his profession again. To gain approval from his father-in-law, he portrayed himself as a multi-talented and outstanding man. He claims that before graduating medical school, he had already passed his bar exam. However, his father-in-law, who's a lawyer, exposed Frank right away and questioned Frank what his true intentions were. This is when Frank uses his good acting skills, crying that he's nothing but a poor man who genuinely loves his daughter. The father-in-law became touched, and reminded him of himself in the past when he got married. Then, with the help of his father-in-law, Frank succeeded in obtaining his law license. While Frank daydreams about his new fulfilling life, he starts to worry that Detective Smith would still come for him. So, he called Smith to persuade him to stop the investigation. However, Smith rejects his offer and assures him that he will certainly be caught sooner or later. Later, on the day of Frank's wedding, Smith suddenly appeared with his team in search of Frank. Upon sight, Frank quickly grabbed his suitcase full of cash and prepares to escape. Before leaving, he confesses to Mary about his true identity and tells Mary to meet at the airport tomorrow. The next day, Mary arrives at the airport as planned, and when Frank was about to approach her, he realizes that Mary is surrounded by Smith's team. Frank realizes that Mary may be in cahoots with them, so he quickly drives away and heads to an aviation school, where he recruits a few stewardesses to tag along him. Clad in a pilot's attire and walking among the stewardesses, the detectives at the airport were busy staring at the gorgeous stewardesses and didn't realize Frank was in the group. Thus, Frank managed to board the plane. Outside, Frank paid a man to act as Frank himself outside the airport. Smith catches him only to realize that he'd been tricked again. Frank's plane departs in the background. Later on, Frank continues to forge checks and hone his skills till the experts couldn't even tell if they're real ones. However, Smith found a clue and soon found Frank. Knowing he's here to catch him, Frank attempts to escape, but Smith assures Frank that his team outside has already surrounded his house. Left with no choice, Frank handcuffs himself and leaves with Smith. Frank was sentenced to over 10 years in prison. Some time later, Smith visited Frank and showed him a forged check. Frank glanced at it and pointed out the holes in the check, deeming it fake. This shocks Smith, so he reports it to his boss after witnessing what Frank could do. Frank was asked to work for Smith's team in the fraud department, so Frank helps the team solve numerous fraud cases. Moreover, he helped the bank improve their check security, and the bank paid him millions in return, turning Frank's life around for the better. Thanks for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe to She Recaps.